Hello everybody, my name is Forrest Stevens. I'm the founder and CEO of Different Media. The interview that you're about to see was an interview I originally shot for the feature-length documentary called The Legal and Underground Scene of Magic Mushrooms. I decided to go a very specific route, which is what happens sometimes in documentary filmmaking. You need to follow sort of a single thread occasionally. My original idea for the film was to go a little broader in the scene of magic mushrooms. I decided to go a little deeper in one direction, which left these interviews and this interview that you're going to see kind of left over. But equally, I find that this interview is as important as the ones that did make it into the film, and that's why I wanted to release these as well. I think that they offer a lot of value and a lot of insights and are very informative. So that's the interview you're about to see right now. It is originally shot for a feature film. If you wanted to see that feature film, you can do so by clicking the links in the description. One final note, the subject matter of this interview might be disturbing to some, and it talks about substances that might be illegal. None of it is medical advice, of course, and it is just for general informational purposes and entertainment only.
Well, my first experience, if I remember correctly, was when I was still, I was in Edmonton. I joined a band, and we kind of traveled. At some point, musicians come to little towns, and of course, they're swarmed by, by people offering them all kinds of substances. I was very inexperienced, but I had a friend in the band who knew about this thing. So he said, "Oh, you should try this." And I said, "Okay." And that was a very memorable night because we were on stage, and suddenly I'm playing the bass. Music we've been playing for over and over, and suddenly everything became imbued with meaning, and beauty. Like every note was just floating there in space. And I don't think I made any mistakes. It's just everything sort of slowed down, and suddenly I felt this sort of space in between the notes being filled with beauty and meaning. I'm using these words, but that was I did all kinds of things during that night. But that was my first introduction to the potential of mushrooms. Psilocybin, and that was it for a long time. I mean, I didn't, go out the next day and got more mushrooms. It was only when I found myself found myself in Vancouver after the band broke up, and I was in my early 20s, I think 21, with the angst and the questions, and who am I, why doesn't anybody love me, what is it all about, the kind of things a young person would ask himself. And somehow I guess I remembered that experience, and somehow things conspired to bring the mushrooms to me. That's how I see it. I had a question, and it just so happened that I was living in the house with sharing half a house with a couple of people, and I had a friend who showed up and said, "Oh, I'm going to take you to this field I know, and we're going to pick some mushrooms." And so we did, and that's when I had, I guess, what I would call a transformative experience, where, well, my questions were answered, basically. I had two sessions, two times when I took the mushrooms, a couple of days apart, and so the way I perceived the experience was, there were voices, as often happens when people talk about these experiences, and they were both inside of me and outside of me, because they were me and not me. They were kind of like I mean, if you think about it, I mean, it's all inside of you. I mean, it's not like, it's nothing objective out there that's speaking to you. But and yet it's something so deep and so profound that it's hard to uh, consider it as being you, as you know yourself. Anyway, I didn't really think about that much. I just knew what I knew, and they basically the way I would define it as they filled a hole or an emptiness that the way I saw it back then everybody has. He's almost born with it, like this kind of a question mark, And somehow they told me, well, I mean, it was a profound experience. There was a lot of things happening. I'm not going to go into it, but and sometimes it was even pretty harrowing. Pretty not always pleasant. I had to go through some thorny forests to get to where I was going. What they said, the voices, was okay. Your emptiness has been filled. Now, you don't need us anymore. That's it. You're complete. And sure enough, when I emerged from this experience, I suddenly everything was the same and everything was different. In Zen Buddhism, there's a saying, before Zen, trees are trees and mountains and rivers are rivers. And as you search for Zen, trees are no longer trees and mountains are no longer mountains and rivers are no longer rivers. And when you find Zen, trees are trees and mountains and rivers are rivers again. It's one of those paradoxical kind of Zen sayings or koans, and that's more or less the way I see it. Everything is the same, and yet everything is completely different. So I had this sort of feeling of I was fine with myself. I've learned to love myself for what I was. Now, did I stop and never went back to that place again? No. Because as I realized later, my purpose was not just to be myself and to attain this kind of acceptance and wisdom and whatever. By the way, being young, of course, I thought of it in kind of almost like there was this sort of what's the word, messianic almost tinge to it, like I'm here, I know things, and I'm going to share them with the world. I don't think like that anymore. But first and foremost, I like to create things and to play with things, and I was looking for that, and I went back to the mushrooms, and sure enough, I never had, that formative experience I had only once, and that was enough as far as finding yourself. You never lost yourself in the first place, but my purpose after that was more to look for ways to play. The way I see it is mushrooms are something that if we go deep enough, it's just like the way mushrooms grow and their colonies. You have the mushrooms peeking out here and there, but underneath they're all connected. That's how I saw it. You go inside, it's almost like go down into the earth or whatever it is, and you connect to, you find that connection that sort of is enormous and huge, and you find answers to whatever you want. So in that way, mushrooms are kind of like, well, they were called helpers, they were called teachers, and that's true. That's how at least I perceive them. I realize that not everybody will have the same experience, and in fact, that makes sense. We're all different and we have different paths, and I even tried to experiment. I tried to offer the mushrooms to different people to see how their experiences would, and I realized, oh, it's very different. Not everybody is looking for the same thing and finds the same thing, and sometimes people just go to sleep. Like, what? Yeah, I just want to sleep and nothing really happens. Or I had these visual hallucinations that really interesting, because for me it was something else altogether. So we filter it through our own prism, but deep inside it's all one. So with the mushrooms, I went back, but it wasn't. It was no longer like they said. You don't no longer need us. So at that point, I found other substances that would LSD, for example, was much more conducive to my purposes. And back then, I did quite a bit of it, maybe too much. But at this point in my life, I still have the greatest respect and for both mushrooms in their capacity to meet us halfway, or even more than that, and to provide answers and provide lessons in some. I'm not even sure. I mean, I have a more of a mystical approach to this, but I'm sure there are scientific angles that can explain the neuroscience behind this. So mushrooms, to me, you go down and you connect. LSD, you go up like a spaceship, then you go through layers, and then you discover all kinds of interesting and fascinating things that you can play with. There's a playful, okay, if you want to get into the cosmology, there's the bottom, which is the mushrooms, and then there's like a layer that's more like, it has less to do with wisdom and knowledge and more to do with playfulness. There's an aspect, actually with mushrooms as well, at some level. And this is where I like to be. Okay, just playing, and because to me music and songs are a way to play with sounds and words in such a way that that creates beautiful or funny or meaningful things that are everywhere. So anyway, the world is a beautiful place, largely unexplored. Both, well, we tend to look, to the outer space, but the inner space is just as fascinating as just as, if not more so, because really, I mean, we don't need to, to go to outer space to find other life forms. I mean, they're everywhere inside of us, and so in that way too, mushrooms can be useful. Not just, okay, I mean, the therapeutic value, of course, could be huge, both for people who suffer from all kinds of psychological problems, but also in a wider sense, more of a kind of a seeing the world in a different way, and being at one with each other and with the place we live in.
But I'm just curious to hear your perspective on where you think your life would be different if you hadn't done mushrooms.
Mm-hmm. Oh, for sure, 100%. They made me what I am. I mean, among other things, but absolutely. They one time I was translating a book, and the writer from Russian to English, and the writer made a mistake, and he, from that day on, my life has changed 360 degrees. He meant 180, but I mean, you end up exactly. But in a way, I kind of like that, because yes, I mean, you end up where you are, but it's a spiral, not a circle. So yeah, definitely, I would not. I'm extremely grateful to the mushrooms for finding me, and I think, although in a way there's an inevitability there also, because That's what I felt. It's almost like at least at that point, where the student is ready, the teacher appears, that kind of thing. And when it's meant to happen, it happens. Yeah, so definitely it transformed my life and made me, to a large extent, what I am today, for better or worse. Yeah. So.
I'd like to hear your perspective on what you think about your son Kai's work in this, and his experiences, and how he's moving in the direction of using this with his schooling and everything, and his his future profession.
Yeah, no, I'm extremely thankful for him finding this path. I mean, let's face it. I mean, when he was younger, teenager, he went, you know how teenagers are, with their whatever missing synapses or whatever it is, or parts of their brain undeveloped. He was in a hurry to try everything and to try it all at once, and it was, it could have ended up differently. But he managed to get through it and to find himself, to find a way to sort of because it's one thing to just sort of experiment and sort of do all these crazy things and to do it for fun, do it for, I always said, like, you got to be really, really respectful and really careful about, especially with these things. And he managed to get a handle on this. And now, together with what he's studying and what he's trying to do, psychology, and we talked about it and said, interesting, because right now there's this resurgence of and sort of meeting of these supposedly unconnected things: science, psychology, and psychedelics. But if they manage to meet and to complement each other, and he's very interested in all, among other things, this aspect of therapy, that's the potential to combine therapy with psychedelics and achieve breakthroughs. And so if as you mentioned, if this trend continues, and he finds a way to incorporate these things in his life and his profession, that would be great. I mean, I'm totally for it. And yeah, so in a strange way, it's kind of yeah, with my experience, and now my son is doing something, taking it somewhere else. It's the path continues, like the story continues. So it'd be interesting to see where it ends up, where he ends up. Anyway, I'm totally on board with it. Yeah.
Right now, we are in a weird space globally with magic mushrooms. Although there are many places where they're outright legal or decriminalized, like Brazil, Portugal, and many areas of the US like Denver, DC, Seattle, and Oregon. One of the messiest battlefields of psilocybin law reform is my home nation of Canada. Psychedelic mushrooms are technically illegal, but try telling the police that, with new magic mushroom dispensaries popping up all the time in major cities. Plus, if you don't want to go out to buy your mushrooms, just get Canada Post to deliver them to your door. Magic mushrooms in Canada are available medically, but it seems like you almost need to be dying to get access to them. There's even publicly traded companies that have their profits tied up in some way with magic mushrooms. To me, it seems like magic mushrooms are at a similar place to where we were in 2018 when Canada legalized cannabis. I decided to look into this more and talk to two people who have been battling for psilocybin drug reform, one doing it above the board with Health Canada, and one doing it through active civil disobedience.